know that COVID has kind of made this whole experience rather interesting this year. As I was driving out and thinking, when were we supposed to have done this one? And this was supposed to have been actually only a couple of weeks ago at the end of September. So we didn't get too bad. We got them nearly the way they were supposed to be. But I certainly appreciate the school holidays and level one again, people wanting to stretch their legs. So good on you for prioritising this. Also realise that this particular topic today might have been one that many people saw and thought, oh, that's not really an issue for me. I don't see myself as having kind of addiction issues. And that's great. I hope that you don't have addiction issues, which is why we tried to sort of broaden this really to say, but what about the idea of change? How is it that we become different people? How does that work? Sometimes change is remarkable and, in fact, sometimes instantaneous. Many of the people in this room, since I've come to meet most of you now, share a Christian faith. And for you, no doubt, there was some kind of rather remarkable change connected to that event. And yet, the fact that we're here today is a reminder that even events like that, whilst they change some essential things, the outworking of the rest of that change takes the rest of our lives. And so this is not to discount some of those kind of experiences, but rather to add to them. And so what would it look like to be on a journey of change, of growth, but what stops us? And what keeps us from really becoming the kind of person that we sort of hope that we would be? I don't know about you, the older I get, the kind of this oscillating between, well, this is me, take me as you find me, and a kind of still a yearning and a desire to keep growing. And so surely this can't be it also, you know, maybe I can still do better yet. I was interested actually just yesterday, my wife was catching up with your older sister, and I love the first comment Debbie made about it. So she said that Jenny's softening as she ages, and that's much nicer. But isn't that nice to hear this idea that someone is still growing and changing in some way? For me, the reason I really do this and transition out of all the other things I've ever done in my life, out of broadcasting, out of pastoral work, was essentially because I heard Debbie say, she could have featured in both these stories, saying to a friend on the phone one day, I'm still getting used to the new era. And, you know, of all the many special things that have happened in my life, that moment is very high on the list because it told me change was possible and that change had happened. Something significant enough that she would describe it as the new era. Of course, it meant I was, you know, had that tinge of embarrassment and frustration about the old era, which was the one that she was going to see the back of. But the new era was new and improved. And, you know, in that particular moment, I think she was probably talking about things like my ability to not kind of erupt or get desperately disappointed or angry if things didn't turn out the way I hoped. It was those sorts of overreactions were no longer part of life for us. Hey Margaret.
Morning.
Come on in. We're just saying hello.
This is Jen.
Hi Jen. Hi Aaron.
Sorry we're late.
That's okay. And so, yeah, so that's the idea really, is that today is about looking at some additional ingredients of change, not to discount the changes that we've already experienced and the many ways in which those have happened. Maybe give some language to why certain changes have happened and some understanding for why certain ones have not. And of course, most importantly, for us to try and find some new tools to put in the toolbox. The tools don't do the work, you know. Me giving you a hammer won't allow you to build a house, but you'll be a step closer. You know, using the tool is what, you know, in concert with other tools, is what the real rebuilding process looks like. So before we look at our sort of opening video to frame the first session today, I want you to find someone who you're going to talk to occasionally throughout the morning. If you've been to other seminars, you know this is how I roll. And I want to find someone to talk to this morning who you're going to ask every time I say breaking affairs. So this is your chance to find your peer person. If they're a stranger, you might have to introduce yourself. And ask them the question, what are you hoping to get out of today? How will we know that today has been a success? So find someone to ask that question to, and we'll come back in a second. Right, so there's going to be some videos today. This video refers to a time of the year where many of us will contemplate change. What time of the year would that be? New Year's, yes. New Year's resolutions where gyms make a lot of money about memberships for people they'll never see. let's think about what it is about change and try to frame some of the issues here in our first video. Oh, come on. No, use that to speak. Well,
Click on it.
It's going.
Yeah.
It's going.
Hey there, Brainiacs. It's a new year. And with the turn of the calendar comes the tradition of New Year's resolutions, where we all resolve to eat better, drink less, exercise more, and feel better after the holidays leave us feeling a bit bloated and tired. But why is it so hard to stick to those resolutions? Why do we have such a hard time breaking bad habits and building new ones? It seems like it should be easy. I should be able to just decide that I want to eat fewer sugary snacks and start eating more healthy whole grains. I want to, so I can, right? The reality is a little more complicated. Habits are a critical part of our daily lives, and they're deeply etched into our neural circuitry. Each time we repeat a habitual action, the pattern is carved just a little bit deeper and gets a little bit harder to break. Which isn't to say that breaking bad habits is impossible. It just requires some focused effort. When we're talking about habits in the behavioral sense, we're talking about learned, repeated behavioral patterns, like the way you tie your shoes, or drive a car, or type on a keyboard. These are behaviors that become automatic and are not necessarily tied to an outcome or goal, but rather tied to a situation or location. What that means is that you don't eat all those cookies at Christmas because you're trying to sate your hunger. You eat them because there's a plate of cookies in front of you, and that's what you do with cookies, because it's what you've always done with cookies. Habits are a kind of memory called implicit memory, while explicit memories are your memories of places, things, and events. Implicit memories are unconscious and don't require you to think about the action while you're doing it. These two different kinds of memories are stored differently in the brain. Explicit memories are recalled using the hippocampus, while implicit memories require the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia is a group of subcortical structures located deep inside the brain that are critically important for motor control, motor learning, behaviors, and emotions. Habits, in particular, are thought to be processed by a part of the region called the dorsal striatum. The dorsal striatum receives signals in the form of the neurotransmitters glutamate and dopamine and acts as a major input to the rest of the basal ganglia, acting as a critical part of the reward learning system. When you develop a habit, you activate a particular kind of learning called stimulus response, which is how your brain learns the relationship between a particular action and the subsequent outcome. For this to work, you need a trigger, a behavior, and a reward. For example, if you feel hungry, the trigger, that will make you seek out a cookie and eat it. The behavior, making you feel full, the reward. Essentially, habits hijack this existing system in your brain by helping you connect certain behaviors with specific rewards. Every time you engage in a behavior that leads to a certain outcome, like eating a cookie causing you to feel full, the neural circuit that processes that information becomes more strongly connected. And over time, that circuit fast-tracks the information about the relationship between the cookie and your feelings. This is sometimes framed as cells that fire together, wire together, meaning that when your neurons are repeatedly activated together, the connections between them become more ingrained. Eventually, you're not even thinking about the motivation behind the action. You're just performing the action because something triggered the now automatic behavior. Our habits often coincide with goal-directed behaviors. They're often useful. Like, you know exactly where to reach to turn on the light when you're heading into your kitchen in the middle of the night because you don't want to stub your toe. It's important for our brains to create these sorts of shortcuts to process information, or we'd get overwhelmed by things pretty quickly. Imagine if you had to consciously think through every step of tying your shoe, every single time you did it. Or if you had to think carefully about the relationship between the gas pedal and the brake pedal every time you got in the car. We build habits to make things faster and to free up the rest of our brains to process other information. The downside of that, of course, is that once those circuits get ingrained in our brains, it's hard to break those habits. Our minds process these behaviors unconsciously, and it takes a lot of concentrated time and effort to undo those connections and build And those habits give our super powerful brains the space to think about even more complex and important things. But luckily, with enough willpower and patience, that same brain gives us the ability to swap bad habits for good. What habits are you trying to break or build this year? Let me know in the comments below.
Right, so before we move on, let's reflect on the video as a way of framing this kind of conversation about where bad habits reside in our brain and how they work. What did you learn from the video? What struck you?
We're doing.
That's a positive way to start.
It's unconscious, perhaps.
It's unconscious, right. And why might that be, like, even just taking that idea that it's unconscious and pairing it with our first idea that we talked about already about self-loathing, why might it be good to acknowledge that that's an unconscious choice? Why might that be helpful? How can we use that to resist self-loathing?
Well, what she said about any habit, think about it when you do it and why you do it, and make yourself become aware of it. You can't fight what you're not aware of.
Right. So we could say with respect to self-loathing, if I'd been more aware, I might have done something different. But actually, part of the problem here was my brain hijacked me. It did something on autopilot. I didn't expect it to do or want it to do. It doesn't absolve us of responsibility, but it puts a context to it that reminds us, our brain chose this when we weren't looking. It just reached and said that. What else did you get from the video?
I like the sentence, sorry.
No, go.
Cells that fire together wire together. I thought that was very powerful because as soon as you think, you create those neural pathways and it's coming back to the unconscious.
Yes.
I think there is comfort in just the statement you made that our brain hijacked us.
Yeah, and that earlier on, when we were more able to make choices, we didn't realize that choosing this connection was going to ultimately become automated when we weren't looking. Okay. And sometimes, we get hijacked in the funniest sorts of ways. Have you ever driven to the wrong place because your brain on autopilot, oh no, I missed the turn off. Or even this, I'm driving to my old workplace. Like, what's wrong with me? I haven't worked there in years. What am I doing? Right? Sorry, Dave.
It's like habits are like attitudes. We develop attitudes so that we don't have to think about things all the time, and it's like a shorthand for getting through life.
That's right. Yeah. So the brain thinks it's helping because it knows it can't pay attention to every bit of information in our world and process it. So it tries to filter stuff out by saying, what if I just make some assumptions? And that'll do you a favour. You won't have to pay attention to that. See cookie, eat cookie. Just an assumption. Don't have to think, am I hungry? Do I need it? Is it good? That's a lot of processing.
It's definitely good.
All right? And so that's that intentionality, why that intentionality is so hard, isn't it? Because it requires insisting that the brain pay attention that doesn't want to.
Isn't that the same as predictive text on your mobile phone? Well, you've done it a few times and your machine throws out what it thinks you
Right, well, it's true. Your text is learning what words and phrases you use a lot, and so it's offering them to you, sure.
Because you believe what it is, if you know you have a habit that you're doing unconsciously, you can then put barriers in the way, like if you hide the chocolate bar behind the carrots, you're more likely to reach for the carrots because it's less effort.
Sure. Well, certainly utilising our laziness is always helpful. Absolutely. Anything else you picked up from the video? So whether it's unconscious, it's fires together?
Jen had a very good one.
No, it was what you said. I wrote down. I love that. See cookie, eat cookie.
I'm not sure that was the lesson we were shooting for, Jan. We're trying to learn to not eat cookie.
But how the brain works.
That's right, just a shortcut. Yeah. And so shortcuts have gotten away on us. Again, so we can now keep the self-loathing a little bit at bay. My brain thought it was helping, but it's not. And that thing that I'm doing might have actually helped once upon a time, but it no longer helps. Or we could put it this way, what served me now enslaves me. Because many of us can think of a time where it served, particularly if we were a child and we were out of options. And we found something that worked from the very limited options we had access to as a child. But then as an adult, with a wide array of options, to still be choosing the narrow option from childhood and not be able to unchoose it is a problem. But there was a time where it served us, but now it enslaves us. Or to use another truth coach, what started off as my bodyguard has become my prison guard. It might have been an action that kept me safe, kept me okay once upon a time, but now it's keeping me trapped in a world I don't want to be in. And I encounter this all the time in counselling, that people can trace back and explain why they do what they do because it used to make sense to them. And the brain doesn't update. So to use our phone analogy, what we could really do would be to wake up in the morning and in your brain go, you have used operating system to download, and take time to actually update the system, but we don't. So the system doesn't update. And remember that basal ganglia is part of that limbic system that's in the center of the brain. That part of your brain that was the first part of your brain to form before you knew about time. And so it's a really challenging place for that automation to live. It lives in a place beyond time. It does not know the difference between 20 years ago and today. It cannot tell the difference. So its shortcut is easily a hijack for us. So, this first session, we're going to try and look just quickly at some of the ingredients for change and the process of change, again, through the lens of psychology. So, just interesting, quite to start with, that people don't behave badly because they lack information about their shortcomings. Most of us know full well it's something we don't want to do. They behave badly because they fall into patterns of destructive behaviour, for which they're currently unable to escape. And again, keeping the self-loathing at bay. If I could escape, I would. If I could escape, I would. I often think of it in terms of this analogy. You ever driven to a place many times and then one day encountered a shortcut? Do you ever take the long cut after that? No. No, your brain easily favours the new and better thing once it knows it exists. But if it doesn't know it exists, it keeps going the long way around. And for us, many of our bad habits are just the long way around because we haven't lived. So, some things to think about in terms of what makes us change. And I start with the one that's the least enjoyable, but the most relevant, and that is pain. For us, change is painful, and staying the same is painful. And often that realization is the beginning of change for people. To realize that, you know what? I can't just be allergic to discomfort and to pain. Pain is actually a critical piece in terms of what helps me move forward. So Henry Cloud says we change our behaviour when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. Consequences give us the pain that motivate us to change. Have you had enough pain yet? What painful consequence of inaction will finally motivate you to start the journey? Now, with respect to pain, most of us are probably thinking actually the challenge for us is our relationship to other people who wish to change and how removing consequences from them seems loving, but is actually unloving because we have removed a powerful motivator for change. They actually need some pain in their world. They need to have enough pain. They need to come to that place, which we have that phrase, the bottom of the barrel for. Bottom of the barrel is just code for saying staying the same is now the most painful thing. Because change is painful. You know, if you're going to lose weight, it is painful to endure hunger, to endure muscle soreness from the gym. If you're giving up a substance, it is painful to go through withdrawal. There's no pain-free way. But this is the important thing, that comfort is the antidote to change. Because where there's comfort, there's no change, there's no growth. Every part of our life where we want to see growth and development, pain is involved. Pain is critical to the change process. Unfortunately, we live in a world that we're allergic to pain, right? Everything that we, often the way we arrange our goals and our hopes is about removing pain. And indeed, in a Christian context, sadly, too often, we think that God's job is to remove pain from our world. What if pain is a critical ingredient? What if the very thing that you keep ducking actually has in it some of the essential ingredients to move forward? Because you won't be able to change until you accept the presence of the pain. But it's this difference, it's flipping the equation. People who are stuck do short-term gain for long-term pain. The short-term gain of having that drink to feel okay today, for the long-term pain of being an alcoholic and never being able to change. And really, we just need to flip that around. I need to start learning to do short-term pain. The pain of resisting, the pain of withdrawal, the pain of detox, for the long-term gain of becoming the person I want to become. There's pain in both equations. You just have to choose where you want the pain. It's an uncomfortable place to start because it means coming to terms with the presence of pain. Number 2, we need to have a vision for how tomorrow can be better than today. And this is the problem with a lot of change behaviour is simply about what I want to stop. I want to stop doing that thing, but not a lot of language about what I wish to start. Who do I see myself? Who do I wish to become? What does that person look like? When I have a much richer idea of that, I'm again motivating change. Now I'm actually able to see something I couldn't see before. And I'm getting to break the moment. We're going to talk about today as one of the sort of refrains is knowing what future you hopes you'll do. What does future you hope you'll do? Does future you get a say in today's activities? You're going to hear a little bit about my weight loss journey today. I often wish that I had lost even more weight, but at least I've lost 20 kilos, so I've got something to talk about. I know I've got plenty more to lose. But part of this is, using that future when I'm standing at the fridge, and I'm honestly, multiple times a day when I'm standing at the fridge, because let's be honest, that's how often I stand at the fridge, is multiple times a day. I ask myself, what does future Aaron hope you'll do? What does future Aaron want you to do right now? He will reap the rewards of your choice today or live with the consequences of your choice. So there isn't just this moment anymore. This moment that fixates and hypnotizes me, that all there is the cookie and I can't see anything else and the world has disappeared. It's just me and the cookie cookie's looking at me. Right? Calling to me. I want to break that moment by saying, actually, future me hopes I'll do something. Future me is invested in this moment. There is more than just this moment. But many of us don't have a rich idea about this future version of ourselves. We just know what we'd like to stop. And I want to encourage you to think much more about who you'd like to become. Who is this future version of you? And why is this behaviour a barrier or incompatible with that? Right. Otherwise, me stopping might just be another version of self-loathing. I want to stop so I can stop beating myself up. That's not enough. Who are you? Who are you becoming? Just a few more ingredients and then we'll reflect together on these ones. Number 3, we need some kind of strategy. Because this is often where people fall down. They just have not happened upon the strategy. And I will explain to you the strategy of weight loss, not because I think it's the only way, but just because I finally found something that worked for me. I had tried several different weight loss things over the years. In fact, like many people, I had felt like I tried everything. But thankfully, when my wife invited me to go and listen to a presentation about this thing she found, I thought, well, given that you've tried everything, why not try one more thing? Because you never know. It could be the strategy. And it could be that it's multiple strategies that are required. And that's why we're talking today about just putting some tools in the toolbox. You might need more tools than the ones I'm going to talk about today, but you might be happy to have some new tools in the toolbox. And so constantly, particularly in counselling, we're really asking people, what is it you lack for change? Is it insight that you don't understand it, or is it a strategy? You just don't have a plan out. Because without strategy, all that's left is what we call white knuckling. I'm just holding on and holding on and holding on and trying to be good and trying to be good and trying to be good. And then eventually I run out of energy and I do it again. plays into our self-loathing again. Well, if only I were better, stronger, more spiritual, more something. Right? So it might be that we just need to find some more strategies. And with strategies come the need for some support. In the system that I'm going to explain just as a working example today, one of the key elements for me was that we did this thing called weight loss coaching works in Sydney, we found it. And the key ingredient, I think, in the end for me was that every day I had to take a photo of my eating journal from the day before, along with my current weight, and send it through Messenger to a little group that were my coach and cheerleaders. And it wasn't so much the act of accountability, although it had some benefit to it, that I was going to have to tell someone what I actually ate and how much I actually weighed today. But it was much more the encouragement and the support that then flowed. In fact, at the beginning of the process, this particular plan wasn't working. And I was really annoyed because this company, this group, kept posting photos of people who had instantaneous and remarkable weight loss. And I kept saying, your weight loss photos are bollocks, it's not working, this is nonsense, this isn't going to work for me. And they would say things like, well, Aaron, remember how you said you tried for 10 weeks? Do you think you can keep going for 10 weeks? How about just another day? Could you do this another day? And then somewhere around the sort of 8-week mark, one of the coaches, who were a husband and wife couple, said, you're a very unique person. We've never had someone complain so much, but not quit. And that was the thing, when I realised that I was allowed to complain and get it out of my system, I could find the strength to go on the day. And I'll tell you how well it worked in the end, but it was those sorts of elements of, oh, I'm actually allowed to suck at this and tell you that I hate you and your plan, and I'm going to stick it around and you're going to support me. And suddenly I was leaning and borrowing some of their strength. I was borrowing some of their strength. When I was out of strength, when I was thinking, I don't want to do this, I don't think it's going to work. These are critical ingredients. We need some cheerleaders and we need to dump the critics, for sure. The critics are just fueling your self-loathing. They're just confirming your darkest suspicions about yourself, that maybe you are in fact faulty and broken, and therefore you should just go back to the same old place of comfort you've always gone. So there are more ingredients. I could have given you a much wider list, but I decided to go with 4. Okay, so we've got support, strategies, vision, and what was the first one? Pain. So tell me, what do you think about those 4? What did you just hear? It's helpful for you. They're workable, that's a good start.
So it goes parallel to Alcoholics Anonymous, isn't it?
Oh, sure. This is why some of these groups have been so successful, because they are utilising some of this, for sure.
The big thing was to do it one day at a time.
Yeah.
Don't try to think of a year ahead, but just one day.
The future you thing, once you start to work for that person,
Yeah.
and you start to believe that you are going to be that person, and
Right.
perhaps you are, but you're just not acting all the time like that person. It just starts to get easier. It's like an upward
Right.
thing. Yeah.
I really like what you just said, Rose, about when you start to believe that that's who you really are. So one of the things that's really important is we want to start practicing living from the inside out. And that works like this, that if we don't do that, we're tempted to look at our bad behaviour, the things we're disappointed about, and say, well, that's the proof about who I really am. Because I'm that guy. I'm that one who does those things. As if the bad things are the defining attribute. That's working from the outside in. I know that it's not very popular in Christian circles to watch this TV program, so just pretend you haven't when I ask you if you've seen Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad is the story of Walter White, who's a chemistry teacher who discovers he has lung cancer, and an earlier mistake in his life meant that he had sold shares in what had become a multi-billion-dollar company, but he was poor and realised that he was going to die a pauper. And he figures, with only a few months to live, he will find a high school dropout that he knows makes methamphetamine, and he will use his chemistry ability to make meth. within a short amount of time, it becomes apparent he's not going to die as quickly as he thinks, and he's very good at making the meth. And eventually, he becomes the drug lord. And the point of the story is that Walter starts to believe that what he is doing is who he really is. And there's this defining moment in the series where his wife says to him, I can't believe that you've exposed our family to this drug world. You've exposed our family to all this danger and these dangerous people that can kill us and hurt us and take everything. And Walter, enraged, turns to her and says, you don't understand. I'm the danger. I'm the danger. You see, he has taken the outside and he's put it on the inside. I've seen my bad behaviour and decided that's the truth about me, I'm bad. But what Rose is alluding to is something far more helpful, and that is actually, when we settle who we really are, the problem with our bad behaviour is that it does not express who we really are. That that's not who I really am. That there's a source of inconsistency there. And my desire now is to move from the inside out, to put it this way. That if I've decided I'm a kind and loving person, but I notice myself be angry and argumentative, and I realise that's making it hard for me and others to see the truth about me, that I'm kind and loving. And when I settle it more deeply on the inside, this is who I really am, then I start to look at actions as whether they are flowing from the truth about me, rather whether they are revealing the truth about me. See, outside-in thinking says my actions are revealing the truth about me. I'm not a very good Christian. I'm not a very good person. I'm not a very good ... But inside-out says, no, I know who I am, and my job is to try and express that into the world more and more and more to make it easier for the world to see. You see, my kindness and lovingness are invisible qualities, and my actions are a chance to make them visible for you and for the world to notice, and for me to notice. See, that's who I really am, kind and loving. Oh, that feels better. So there's a real key in there, Rose, so thank you for sharing that. Okay. I wanted to show you just briefly a model of change just before we take a quick break. And we won't dwell on this because I've got a handout for it for you to reflect on. This is a model that has been developed as a kind of a psychological understanding of what happens in the change process for us. And it's really interesting. I've been using this with some clients. It's interesting in the modern world, they have several male clients, and not encountered a female yet who has this particular addiction, but an addiction to gaming. So gaming has become a new thing that has really caused a lot of trouble. I suspect many of us could relate to the social media addiction that was shown in the video as being all too easy and common. But I showed some of my clients this model, and it was interesting to see them now start to use the language of, well, the problem is, Aaron, I'm still stuck in pre-contemplation. So let's take a look at the different stages. So pre-contemplation. Not really considering making a change. This is where you'll hear people say, it's not really a problem. I don't think it's that big of a deal. They're downplaying the consequences, they're downplaying reality. They're not sure that their behaviour really is that damaging. They're not convinced at all that there's really that big of a problem. What's needed, of course, is for them to become more aware of the potential benefits. But unfortunately for them, the cost of giving up seems to be the thing that dominates their thinking during pre-contemplation. And so, in this phase, when you meet people in this phase, you realise that this is their ambivalence towards change, their denial of the problem, is the fact that they're stuck back in the starting blocks of this change process. It's really important to identify where we or others might be at. But then, perhaps after several years, perhaps after several arguments, perhaps after several episodes of having your phone cut off because you've lost all your money because you gambled it or whatever it might be, you move past pre-contemplation to contemplating. During this phase, you may view change as a process of giving something up rather than gaining something precious. So we've noticed already, haven't we, that giving up as a motive is actually really early on in the process. It's much more about I got a problem than I'm becoming someone. And so at this stage, when we notice someone in contemplation, we want to ask them some good questions. Why would you want to change? And what do you think stops you from changing? And what can help you make the next step in change? They're contemplating. They are not ready to commit. I've noticed in contemplation, one of the most common things I hear is someone suggesting some kind of modified version of their current behaviour. Well, what if I only gamed on the weekends? Or what if I only drunk with friends? Or what if I only had some kind of edited, moderated version? Because the thought of letting go of that thing seems too great during contemplation. They're not ready to sign on for that yet. That's always interesting. Then determination. Then the small changes begin. Okay, so they start to dip their toe in the water, so to speak. They start to, we're thinking about weight loss, they start to think about what diet would work for me, what gym could I join and afford. And they start reading some books, they start watching some YouTube videos. They start to gather information. Because now they're really growing some motivation, but they really haven't truly begun. They're just kind of tiptoeing around it. They're trying to maybe not drink as much as they used to, but they're not really at that point of saying, I need to stop drinking. But they're trying to make some early changes in the sense to see if it's something they could do. Then they move finally to action. Now we're getting somewhere. Now they decide, you know what? The journey begins today. And even if it takes me a year to lose this weight or to beat this addiction, I'm going to start. And at this point, reinforcement support are incredibly helpful. So we need to keep reviewing motivations, resources and progress to make sure the plan is working, in other words. Do I have all the plans? So when I was talking to a man about gaming addiction, and he says, oh, well, I've tried white knuckling in the past, that didn't work. Oh, I've tried being accountable to a friend. I'm like, good. So let's just add and add and add and add. And if at each point you're saying it's still not working, then we just agree we haven't found the right collection of tools yet, rather than giving up is impossible. But you have to move all the way through pre-contemplation, contemplation, determination to action. Most of my clients get stuck around determination. They're interested in the idea, they're not really convinced it would work, they're more concerned about what they're going to lose and what they're going to gain. But then that time of action comes. Now, this next step is the one that people don't like. And, well, that's interesting. We don't have it on the actual slide, but you'll notice it in the graphic. Relapse. Relapse. It's an uncomfortable thing to admit to. Change almost never happens in a straight line.
That's a great statement. Thank you for saying that.
Almost never.
Say that again.
It almost never happens in a straight line. It's a wiggle. It's a, you know what, I was making good progress and then I had a bit of a slide and then I tried again, and it's much more like that. Relapse is part of the process. In fact, relapse can be a really helpful part of the process. Why might relapse actually prove to be helpful? What does relapse have to offer us?
You get the opportunity of feeling about you.
More when you relapse, you think, that is where I'm at, but moving forward.
Right, okay, so you've got more contrast now between what it feels like to relapse versus what it feels like to make progress. Right? Did you hear something?
Yeah, same.
Yeah? What else?
Compassion.
Hmm?
Self-compassion.
Right, I might have to be really kind to myself
Yeah.
as realising, gosh, this isn't easy. I didn't want to do that. I am disappointed, but I'm going to be good to myself. Yeah.
You know how good a sugar rush is?
You realise, that the thing I'm giving up actually still has some things I kind of like, but I kind of don't anymore.
I sometimes find now, because I've also lost 20 kilos, that the things that I used to enjoy, a whole block of chocolate for instance, I can sometimes only manage half a block now before I feel quite sick. And so the thing that you thought was good isn't as good as it used to be.
Right, that's interesting. So now that you're experiencing other things, you also learn that as good as the sugar rush is, it's not as good as I remember. Because something else is actually even better. But we would hope that in there, we're going to take the time to reflect and learn what triggered me. Why did the relapse occur? What conditions set me up for failure? And understanding that more specifically is going to be critical to moving forward. You know, I haven't smoked cannabis for 22 years, but the only way I found the way out was to cut ties with every friend who smoked. You know, and I remember vividly sitting, you know, as I was trying to give up, and my friend said, "Oh, I don't like going to the tinny shop. Will you go to the tinny shop and buy it from the gang for me tonight?" I remember sitting in the car, I turned to him and I said, "I'm going to do this one more time, but you're never going to ask me again." And so I went and got the purchase, and I said, "Fine, I got you drugs." I thought, you know what, I think I had to be done, not just with cannabis, but with him as well. It was very costly, but the trigger had to be acknowledged. I can't yet be safe in the presence of people smoking cannabis. I will join them.
When I went many years ago, I went down to Queenbury Hospital as part of the family team, and one of the biggest things that with addiction, with giving up an addiction, was the ties, because sometimes they were the only friends they had, so the complete realisation of having to cut ties with so-called friends they knew. It's and the complete change of life.
Yeah, right. And so that's part of the power of relapse, is that we then learn some reality checks. And actually the problem just isn't my behaviour. The problem might be some of the people I'm hanging out with. There is much of a problem here. Right? We get to see some context and learn. So relapse is only a problem if we don't learn from it. But it has critical learning information. And when it happens, we've got to be able to be kind to ourselves and say, well, this was expected. This is nothing unusual is happening because I relapsed. Now, because one of the problems with relapse is that we often then make that giving up point, right? Oh, well, I had pizza, solved the diet, I'm off. Uber Eats, can you bring me one of everything? You know, because we figure I've stuffed it up now, all bets are off, just do what I want. Right? But if we see relapse as a natural part of the process, I wasn't expecting myself to just stop and never do that thing again. But rather, we want to see the gap between the episodes getting longer, the time in the episodes getting shorter, and the intensity of the episodes getting shorter.
Also that when you do relapse, you don't have as far to go to catch up as you did when you started. So instead of coming from there and you made it to here, and you might go back up to there, but now you don't need to go that much to get back to where you were.
Right. So often the lie of relapse is I'm starting from ground zero. It's not true. You have not undone your progress by relapse. And that's only if you have this sort of all or nothing kind of worldview. But if you see yourself as making progress on a journey, hey, I've never gone a month without it before. Even when I relapse, that month doesn't go away. That's still part of your story. That's your new story. I've just gone a month. I wonder if I can go longer than a month. And I've gone a month, and instead of binging for a week, I only binged for a day. Wow, that's better than usual too. I'm not starting from zero. I'm simply journeying through to health. Now, ultimately, our hope, of course, is that we're going to find new behaviours that stick. And that's why our video is very much, and today really is, that addiction, I really want to think more about automation than addiction. Addiction is such an ugly word, isn't it? Because it makes us feel powerless. But automation is the problem. It's negative automation. It's the automating of a negative behaviour instead of a positive one. But since I've automated so many behaviours in my life, knowing that it's just automation at its heart means I have a chance to automate something new. And so I can apply the things I've used to automate things I want. And this is where we need to remind ourselves that these negative actions are not the only automated ones. They're not the only automated ones in our life. There are lots of great things that you and I can do that we have learned to automate. Lots of great things. Things that come naturally to us through practice. Skills that we've developed over many years. Maybe we use them in the workplace, maybe we use them at home. A chance to automate something new. Addiction's not the only story about you. It's just a version of negative automation. We want to find another story. And part of that is about reminding ourselves, hey, I'm good at automating things if I want to, the right things. The pathway out is just new automation. But keep in mind what the video said. There's no delete button in the human brain. That's why relapse happens. Because we couldn't delete the pathway that you formed. There is no way. But what we could do is cover that pathway over with some cobwebs through lack of use, making it harder to use. But that's why, AA, one of their phrases is that alcoholism is always an ism and never a wasn't. To remind you that your pathway for addictive behaviour will always be with you. That pathway is not going anywhere. It's always an ism for you. It never wasn't. But the behaviour could become a wasn't. It's the pathway that won't become a wasn't. It's there. We are going to make choices, but when we use our analogy of finding a new shortcut to that place, it's about choosing that new shortcut. And that comes easier and easier. My brain favours the better way once it knows of a better way. Of this costly way. Alright friends, we've gone a little bit over for our morning tea time break, but let's take a break for 10 or 15, however long it takes to have some scones and some tea coffee, stretch the legs and use the loo, and we'll try and get back here about 20 past defining moments, because that's the problem, of course, is that giving them defining power is the problem. I wish that slide said life-describing moments.
Better.
They simply describe where I've been, what I've done, what's been done to me. But they don't define, because they don't actually change the essential truth. And so we live in a world that uses phrases like this and perpetuates the idea that what I've done or what's been done to me defines me. No, it describes me. It describes me that I wear glasses. It does not define me. I'm not less of a person because my eyesight isn't perfect. It just describes me. And whatever's happened to you describes you. It describes where you've been and what's been done and what's happened. But those events are often the setup for addiction. Obviously, there's this whole other setup, which is simply that things feel good, and some of us are addicted to feeling good and don't know how to not feel good. That's not what we're going to talk about today so much. We're going to talk about needing to feel good because we feel so bad. And that's not so difficult to understand, the desire to feel good. Oh, by the way, I was asked to clarify that the alcohol is never a wasn't, it is always an ism and never a wasn't means, it's always a present tense issue for your pathway of your brain. It's not going away. It's never in past tense. It's never in the history books entirely. You can never say, I think there's some truth. You can never say, well, I know for sure I'll never have a bowl and drink again in my life. No, I know that pathway still lives in your brain. I hope it's true. It can be true, but it's not that somehow you magically delete it. So let's hear a story and think about our own stories this morning about what set us up for needing comfort.
Growing up, I didn't feel safe at home, and I was picked on a lot at school. When I was 14, I tried alcohol for the first time. I loved how it made me feel. This is how I've always wanted to feel, like everyone else. I thought I was managing my life with my drinking. However, I became more isolated. Over time, I found myself lying to loved ones, hiding alcohol, and keeping secrets. All so that I could drink without judgment. I never wanted to get to the place where people would say,
"She's ruining her life.
Look at that drunk.
Why would she choose alcohol over her family? I don't get it."
Why is she drinking herself to death? Psh, worthless.
I started to feel that I was doing this to myself, and alcohol was more important. How did I get here? Did I really choose addiction? I chose to take a drink like most of my friends, but I didn't choose to have an addiction. I realized that living well for myself was the key, which inspired me to learn more about what made me different from my peers, why I became addicted to alcohol, but they didn't. The part of our brain that keeps us well can have devastating effects if it doesn't work properly. The area of the brain directly behind your forehead is known as the prefrontal cortex. This area is kind of like the brain's executive control. One of its major roles is regulating different pathways in the brain, such as the fear and reward pathways. For example, when we experience traumatic events, the prefrontal cortex activates the fear pathway and signals to another brain structure called the amygdala, which processes fear. In turn, the amygdala may activate another brain area known as the hippocampus, which stores information about threatening people, places, or things. In the future, when we encounter them, the hippocampus will remind us to avoid them. On the other hand, it seems that the reward pathway is less active after trauma. It's possible that substances, such as alcohol or heroin, are used in an effort to feel better. So what does this mean? Why did my brain think that alcohol was a good coping strategy? Scientists now believe that while the reward pathway is underactive following trauma, the fear pathway is overactive. Remember the prefrontal cortex? Well, it can't do its job properly to balance the two pathways. So, my brain presented the solution to keep drinking, which increases reward and decreases the fear I lived with. At this point, it wasn't about being happy, it was about surviving. Learning that there were real changes in my brain allowed me to be kinder to myself and realize that addiction was not my choice. That being said, I don't want to go back to who I was when I started drinking. When I thought I was the problem, there wasn't much to be done. When I realized something was wrong with my mind, then I knew change was possible. I learned that if I could change my mind, I could change my life and form a new path for myself. Even though we talked about how trauma can lead to addiction, there are many other factors that can also contribute to someone developing an addiction, such as genetics, personality, and mental illness. There is so much value in learning about addiction, and I believe it is the key to reducing stigma. Stigma around addiction is very real, and it is the biggest barrier for people trying to seek treatment. Join the movement with thousands of others working to reduce stigma around substance use and addiction. Visit capsa.ca for more information.
Right. So what do you take from the video? What struck you in that? It was a great explanation of the brain there. I wanted to show you the pathway stuff. What did you see that was useful?
Trauma shrinks the reward process.
Right. Very hard to naturally have those reward things that stabilise our brain and our body. Yeah. Trauma doesn't go away, it just switches it on and it stays on if we're not careful. What else?
And auto responses in the brain that start going from recognise that it just happens as auto and the recognition is.
Yeah, the brain thinks it's what you want. It's trying to help you. This is a really important rethink. Addiction isn't the problem, it's a bad answer. It's a bad answer. The issue is real. The answer is needed. Your brain chose a bad answer. It's a really important rethink. I'm on the quest for better answers, less costly answers.
There was also 3 different kind of courses: genetics, personality, and also the third one.
Mental illness.
So there's quite a few things that can trigger it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And so I'm glad that she acknowledges those. For this section, though, we're going to focus on the role that pain causes in setting us up for finding bad answers. I don't actually believe that personality is a bigger play personally. And the reason for that, fundamentally, is I really struggle and allergic to the idea of pinning it on any problem we have on personality. Why would I have trouble with that, do you think? What about that answer?
Makes you a bad person again.
Right, could make me a bad person.
Implies you can't change.
right, I can't change. If it's a personality feature, if it's hardwired into me, I'm screwed. Right? But if it's actually something I have learned and adopted, maybe more interested in it because of my personality, for sure. You know, I have a cousin who, you know, when I ask him, what do you want to do for your birthday? What restaurant do you go to? He says, food never really features in my thinking. And I'm like, I have no idea who you are. Features in my thinking most of the time. Like, yeah, sure. So my personality sets me up, you know, for sure. For sure. But I can learn other things. So I want to soften the personality part as an answer, for sure. Yeah, anything else you got from the video?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so is what you're saying genetic predisposition is...
I'm not saying it doesn't form a part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
I think it's easily overplayed.
You're right.
All right? Okay. In the same way that my genetics mean that sadly the food I eat likes to stay with me for the rest of my life. The food other people eat seems to be burned up on impact. I hate those people. But yeah, so sure, genetics is not serving me, it's making the problem. Let's think about the trauma of childhood. If you were in the first seminar we did, we focused a lot on this, so we won't recover or retrace those steps. Suffice to say, even over morning tea, we were hearing the story about how learning about your ACE score was a really important thing, and that's a really important part of seeing how well you've done when you realise your children have much lower ACE scores than you do. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and these experiences are the ones that most deeply affect us, particularly if they're ones that occur commonly. And if you haven't done your ACE score, I suggest that you go online and find the questionnaire, but then if you get a high score, you might want to have my phone number on speed dial. Because it has been a fascinating thing, talking with people. It's interesting, some people, when they hear their ACE score is high, I've had bro members break down and go, oh, thank God, it explains everything, I understand finally. But then I've had other people, and it seems mostly men who struggle with it, who'll be like, nah, not a thing. I'm like, dude, your ACE score is really high, this is a thing. No, not a thing. I'm like, wow. So people have less kind of connection sometimes to the realities of it. Suffice to say that the ACE score, very quickly in just 10 questions, determines how much physical abuse, emotional abuse, how much neglect, sexual abuse, physical abuse you experience. It's really interesting how they, household dysfunction, just being in the presence of an unstable environment is this ongoing kind of trauma. And I want to share a little bit of my story today. I don't think I shared it in the first one. Did I tell you the story about my mum in the first one?
No.
No. Okay. I'm sorry that my mum will get a bad rap in 2 stories today, but it's she actually, if we're going to think about her ACE score, because it sets me up for mine, is that in order to know my story, you have to know my mum's story. So she was the only child to a solo mum in the era where that was, you know, a cause of great stigma. She wasn't allowed to be baptised by the local priest because she had been quote-unquote born in sin. Actually, turns out there was a bit of scandal around my mum's birth. A local politician had an affair with my nana and skipped town when he found out that nana was pregnant, which is why we vote national.
Good for you.
Gotta have a reason. Actually, my mum had a really sad childhood because her mum was mentally ill. And throughout childhood, my mum found her mum unconscious from suicide attempts on more than one occasion. And my nana, her mum, had these kinds of little phrases she would say to mum as a child when she was dating a man: I can only love one person at a time, which was her way of saying, you know, your turn at the moment. So my mum grew up in a really unwell environment, probably mostly emotional abuse and neglect. That her own mother was unavailable, and the mental illness of her own mother. So it's interesting actually as you look back, my brother would say of my mum, she spent her lifetime wanting children, and when she got them, she didn't know what to do. Which I think is a reasonable summation. She had no experience of family life, not really. So that didn't come easily to me. So my nana got bowel cancer and died when I was about 7, somewhere around there. And it wasn't long after Nana had died that it was Mother's Day. So my mum is facing her first Mother's Day without her mum, right? Which is really traumatic for my mum because, you know, when her own mother had died, it was like her whole family had died. You know, this was the only person she'd ever had. And so mum was really depressed and in bed, and I think my dad had lost track of the fact that it was Mother's Day. So he comes to me at about 9 o'clock in the morning and says, it's Mother's Day, can you go down to the New World and buy the sampler box of biscuits? You understand the sampler box? So we've got the sampler box, and I'm walking back, and I'm thinking it's going to be a good day. I love my mum, it's Mother's Day, I'm going to have that biscuit, it's going to be a good day. See cookie, eat cookie, thank you. And so I appear in the bedroom, and Mum is still in bed, she hasn't got it up yet. And I present her with the biscuits, and she throws the biscuits on the floor and says, "You've forgotten Mother's Day, you're a terrible son." And being a small child, I run from the room, and you know, I'm terribly upset. Now my dad, kind of knowing really, he was probably more to blame for that scene than I was, because he had forgotten really. I didn't even know what day it was, let alone it was Mother's Day. He never comes to comfort me. No one ever comes. I want you to hear that. No one ever came to comfort me. Dad goes in and tries to soften things with Mum. They calm her down. Nobody ever comes. I want you to hear that. I call that the second trauma. The second trauma. The first trauma is the bad thing that happened. The second trauma is that nobody ever came to comfort you. So we faced pain alone. And the longer I'm a counsellor, I realise that it's that category that I faced my pain alone that is the real setup for addiction. Because it's a setup because it says I cannot rely on others to help me. I will have to help myself. So I will have to find someone to comfort myself with. Because nobody ever can. And that's why the origin of a lot of the stuff that we're thinking about today has its home in an event like that. Now sadly I should tell you a second story, and then I'm going to invite you to tell the story to someone beside you. You decide based on how well you know that person, the level of story you'd like to tell them. You might like to tell them a fairly generic type story about something that's happened. You might say, I don't wish to share a story, that's fine too. Or you may wish to tell them the story. It's up to you. You've heard my story, so you know. Sadly, when I had children, my youngest daughter Emily looks a lot like me, and I look a lot like my mum. So, Mum was very, very much connected to Emily. And so she wanted to form a real close connection. My mum's a dog breeder, dog groomer, dog shower, right? So dogs every part of our world. And so she said to Emily, why don't you come to dog shows with me and you can show dogs. Now my mum's the kind of person that, you know, when I say that she shows dogs, I mean she imports dogs from Finland to show. I mean, she shows dogs. And Emily says to me before she's about to go away on a weekend, when she's about maybe 12 in this story, she says to me, Dad, I'm really busy this year. I've got cheerleading, I've got netball. I think I'm going to kind of give the dog showing a bit of a miss this year, and I'm going to let Nana know. Gee, I wish I could go back in the time machine. I knew too much about my mum to know that that would be a good thing, but of course I couldn't have imagined how it was going to play out. I have in my mind at the end of the weekend, Emily's going to say, Nana, I think I'm going to just take a break from the dog show. Instead, a few moments after Emily arrives on the Friday night, my mum says, oh, I've just imported another dog. And the way showing works is you have to win 8 shows for the dog to become a champion in breeding terms. So it's a bit of a process. It takes a while to win 8 shows. So of course the whole language was, Emily, you're going to help this new dog become a champion. And Emily, not understanding any of this about Nana, being raised in a home that was loving and supportive and consistent, thinks, oh, I should probably just let Nana know that that's not going to happen. And says, oh Nana, I'm really busy, I'm thinking that I'm going to get this. To which she then says, my mum says to Emily in a rage that overwhelms her, well, I don't love you anymore. So the next thing, I get a phone call from my daughter, who is beside herself, inconsolable. Such a thing has never happened. How could this be said to her? And, since then, my daughter's 18 now. She's had very little to do with Nana. Sadly, being in Nana's presence triggers anxiety for her. I again, years later, in trying to make it work, dropped Emily off for a sleepover when she's like 16. On the drive, I'm driving away. Emily's in the bedroom beside herself. Dad, you got to come and get me. I can't do it. I can't be here tonight. I can't do this. And I made a really bad parenting call because I was more afraid of my mum's disappointment than concerned for my daughter's welfare, and said, "I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm sure it'll be fine." It wasn't fine. The next day I had to come and pick her up rather than have a full weekend with Nana. She was beside herself with anxiety. Right. These life-describing moments, they describe where we've been, but boy, can they really set us up. Set us up for wanting to medicate the pain, to find an answer. Now, thankfully for Emily, because she had access to quick support in that moment, we were back there within half an hour of this event happening, providing support for her. Of course, it was a nightmare of a scene. So I arrived there to pick her up. I've never seen my daughter so upset that I don't pay attention. And my mum's fence near the driveway had a high section and a low section. I missed the low section. I ripped the bumper off my car, blew a tyre off. So there I'm standing trying to change the tyre while Emily's just beside herself, inconsolable. I'm in the dark trying to work out, what do I do with the bumper? Do I pull it all the way off? Do I hold it on? It was quite the episode.
Sorry, I missed what your mother said to Emily the first transaction.
Yeah, she just said, "I don't love you anymore."
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, which is a very painful. See, for my mum, the disappointment of separation in that moment, or the perceived separation, was so profoundly traumatic that she lashed out in pain. Now, I know that, but the 12-year-old can't be expected to do that emotional management. So, no wonder. What set you up for pain? What set you up for needing answers, finding comfort? And if you don't have a story, hey, good for you. I'm glad you don't have a story. Good for you. No, and you don't have to share a story that's, like I said, too deep for today, but if you want to, you might like to share just for the next few moments with the person next to you about something that you realise, you know what? You might just give the broad category, I was raised in a home where, or you might want to tell a specific story like I told. Why don't you get into your 2s or 3s and talk to each other. Where did the pain come from? Glad to see that so many of you were able to share those stories. And really what we want to ask ourselves when we're thinking about it is, what maybe did I conclude because of that event in my life? For me, I concluded that I really was terrible. I was a terrible son. That wasn't a hard conclusion to draw, I was told. And that with that, there was something faulty or broken about me that I didn't measure up. And as a result, there were labels that were attached to that. And in many respects, I found answers as I grew that were around performance initially. I realised if I could get good enough grades, my parents didn't seem to think I was so terrible. If I could be a star. Gosh, I wonder as I look back at my 25-year radio career and the ambition of a young broadcaster, whether it was really just because then I wouldn't be a terrible son. Because it's interesting now that I've done a lot of that interior work, I don't need to be on the radio anymore. It's okay not to be that person. Because I'm far more comfortable being me. Whereas I didn't know how to be good without being some kind of
superstar.
Yeah, well I thought that it would make the difference. I mean, after all, if the world was celebrating me, you must be wrong. Because isn't that what a celebrity is? Someone who's celebrated? Well, if the world's celebrating me, screw you. See, prove to you I'm not a typical son. Not exactly the right motive. So there are all kinds of events that can trigger these sorts of things. I want to give an example of another one just for us to use as a working example. So this particular young man, at the end of primary school, his last year of primary school, he'd been getting good grades all through primary school, but then he has a year where he just mucks around and he gets really bad grades. And Dad comes to the parent-teacher meeting, and for the first time, of course, he's hearing about how bad his son is done. And this family had immigrated, and with the hopes of a new life. You know? And so when they got back in the car, very angrily, Dad says to son, "We didn't move halfway across the world for you to become a garbage collector." Because that's what he sort of is playing out would be the future of someone with these kinds of grades. Not anything wrong with being a garbage man, but it wasn't what this dad had helped for. He then kicks the son out of the car and makes him walk home. Alright? Nobody there for me again. Notice the theme? Notice the theme? Facing trauma alive again. Trauma of an angry parent. Trauma. And so we want to use that as a working example now to think about the sorts of things that are the setup for addiction. Because it means, you see, as a result of trauma, before we get to the answer, in terms of addiction is one of those answers we've found, it's the fact that we then bump into certain feelings that feel terrible that we want to medicate ourselves from because we can't bear them. So we might avoid them in positive ways or less costly ways, but when they come up, they seem terrible. So let's take that example of this young man as he grows into an adult. And this is fascinating, you see, because you don't know this man and I do. And I'm going to ask you to guess, what feelings do you think he became allergic to by the time I meet him as an adult? Which things is he saying he wants to avoid at all costs?
Dumb.
So feeling dumb, yeah? Abandoned, hates the feeling of being abandoned, sure.
Left behind.
Being left behind, yeah.
Rejected.
Rejected, sure. Disappointment. Somebody's disappointed in me. I'm disappointed. An allergic feeling. Ooh. Avoid disappointment.
Anybody raising their voice?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I didn't. It probably was quite true, but I didn't see that one myself. But yeah.
Disapproved of.
Disapproved of, for sure.
Humiliated.
Right. Hates being seen in a certain way. Fascinating, because this man would go on to have a setback. He would have an injury that would mean he couldn't work anymore.
Rejected.
And yes, it definitely rejected is one of the feelings. But in that context, even though he was actually by that stage a very successful person, living in the rich side of town with plenty of resources, he said he would feel humiliated just standing at the letterbox and seeing his neighbours drive to work. Humiliated. Was there any reason to be humiliated? No. But his own sense of what do others see. Very painful. Very painful. And it might not be on there at all, but as a kind of working example. And I wonder what feelings you're allergic to. I wonder what feelings you try and avoid at all costs. The buttons, you see. I wonder if we could turn that phone on silent, would that be alright? Turn off the notifications. That one's popular. Just really disappointed I'm not that popular. It's very popular. Everybody's briefing me. See, if you have now that you've heard my story, what do you think some of the feelings are that I still today struggle with? What would be a trigger for me? In light of my story around adolescence.
Maybe misjudged.
You got him one. Misjudged. There would be no greater pain for me than for you to see me in a way that I don't believe is true. If you claim something about me that I don't believe is true, that is one of the most painful feelings for me. And thank goodness my wife knows my buttons. I'll tell you a story. We're sitting in a meeting where somebody else in the meeting wanted to raise a complaint that my email style is abrupt. By which I mean, I'm not one for lots of flowery language at the beginning of, I tend to email like I text. So the minimum number of words, the most efficient conveying of information. Margaret and I used to work together, so you can see some of my very brief emails.
I always appreciated it.
Right. This particular person did not. They felt that my email was abrupt. This was the judgment of them. And what was fascinating was, as soon as they left the meeting, my wife turned to me and said, "It must feel terrible to feel like they think that you're abrupt when we know that you're just trying to do efficient, right?" She immediately wanted to soften the blow of being misjudged. Because I wouldn't mind being called abrupt if I was in fact abrupt. The problem was I didn't believe I was abrupt, I just believed I was efficient. Expedient. So yeah. And now the thing is that when that feeling comes up, that's the source of pain, right? The pain isn't generic. The pain is connected to a particular trigger and a particular conclusion. And my brain, remember, my limbic system doesn't know about time. So when somebody is misjudging me, what does it think's happening? It's happening again, just like before. Nothing is different. And this is where Debbie stepping in to soften me made it different instantly. Because now I wasn't a child alone with the trauma. Now another person had stepped directly in to support the trauma. You're not alone. We know it isn't true. I'm here to comfort and support you. But my brain didn't know that. And so immediately I feel as vulnerable and traumatized as a child, which is why, unfortunately, to my shame, in plenty of other moments when being misjudged, people have gotten the version of Aaron that I don't like. Because I have to.
What happens when Debbie is not around?
Right. Yeah. Well, we're going to find out before we finish today. Yeah. But that's the key difference, was that I had access to support. But without it, if I don't then support myself, then I'm going to lean for comfort somewhere, to make that pain go away, to not feel alone anymore. And everybody has their go-tos. The fridge was always a reliable, available source of comfort. Much more reliable than any of the people that live. And then behind the emotions sit the lies that we believe, the conclusions about life that we have formed that make it that much harder again to break free of the addiction because we now believe these. I want you to imagine that your soul is like a canvas and it's blank when you are born. And during childhood, these moments happen and you start writing things on your canvas, writing things that you have learnt about you, about others, about the way the world works. And I had written, for example, on my canvas, I am not enough. Other people decide if I'm enough. If I can perform well enough, I might be enough. I'd written these things on my canvas. They become the operating system of my life, and so they mean I'm set up for pain more and more and more, and therefore more likely to automate some kind of negative action, an addiction. So let's take a look at some of the lies. Sadly, I reckon I could probably get all 12 of them. If it was a test, I get 12 out of 12. I think I believe all these at some point. I must have the love and approval of others. I must avoid disapproval at all costs. Well, you can immediately see why I would have adopted a lie like that. And so, when I stood up in front of an audience as a child and they applauded, when I realised I was such a strong singer that in the choir they had to put 2 or 3 girls against me in the duets. And they were saying, this kid has lungs. And it felt good to be approved of. And it's, and I learned early on that this is my favourite sound in the world. I know how much it's my favourite sound. We went through a season just for fun. It was almost mocking in the family. that whenever I walked in the room, the family would applaud. It kind of was a running joke for a little while. But the stupid thing was, it flipping worked.
Yes.
And my brain is so connected to applause that I could be standing on a stage like as an MC where the last act is being applauded and the crowd is still applauding. And I'm like, thank you. It's not about me. It's about anyone which is gone. But I'm hearing such is the connection between applause and feeling good.
So anyone that wants to get on your side with a Christmas present should get a blank CD and make it all of clapping.
There we go. Right. So living without the love and approval of others or encountering the flip side of that is that's impossible. I must avoid disapproval. So I became an over-functioning, high-performing kid. You know, I was performing well in school, performing well in performing arts, that was my jam, and I used those things to generate approval. And they soothed me, they eased me. And when I didn't have access to them, I felt like something was wrong. I must be perfect, a success in all that I do. I must not make any mistakes. Yeah, because for me it was a small mistake that led to disapproval. Wasn't it? It was a very innocuous mistake. So clearly mistakes are dangerous. And the best way to stay safe then must be to avoid mistakes. Of course, this is impossible. Nobody can live a mistake-free life. So you set yourself up for pain by adopting this belief. But you can imagine as a child, remember, essentially what I'm asking is, could you go back and visit the 7-year-old, the 5-year-old, whatever age you were, and think, hold on, what do they really know about life? What do they really know about the way things truly are? You know, like a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old in my case was not the right person to be writing on my canvas. What the 7-year-olds know. Can't even tie their shoelaces. People must always do the right thing. When they do not, they must be punished. Ouch. These lies, by the way, are written by Dr. Albert Ellis. He is the person behind REBT, Rational Emotional Behavioural Therapy. And his student, Aaron Beck, is the man who reformed this into what you all know as cognitive behavioural therapy. Which is interesting because CBT focuses mostly on the beliefs that cause the actions, whereas what I like about REBT is it goes one step further behind the scenes and says, yeah, but what is the core belief, the subconscious belief sitting behind it all? Number 4, things must be the way I want them to be, otherwise life will be intolerable. I think it was this one that, you know, when Debbie says on the phone that day, I'm still getting used to the new Aaron. I think it was this that she was probably alluding to. Because I remember that not long after that, there was an episode where we were just about to drive away to the summer holiday and the car battery was flat and needed to be replaced. And I watched the whole family bristle when we realised. And then I watched them all go, like dogs cocking their head, when they saw me calmly say, well, right down to the place and I'll buy you battery and I'll be back in 20 minutes and we just have to leave a little bit later. And they were like, what have you done with that? They're all waiting for the eruption of things are not the way I want them to be. Suddenly I was learning to tolerate distress, tolerate disappointment. My happiness or unhappiness is caused by external events. I have no control over them. Yes, the locus of control, that's a huge challenge for people with addiction problems. Where do you perceive control lives in your world? Are you a big person in a big person's world, or are you a little person in a big person's world, expecting the big people to do the right thing, to know the right thing, to take responsibility for you and for your happiness and for your stuff? Or do you know that actually you have power and are using it? I must worry about things that might be dangerous, unpleasant or frightening, otherwise they might happen.
That's so funny.
I did really well yesterday. I'm really proud of myself. I went and got my first COVID test yesterday. Because I have to get one because I do some work at the port. And I started it on Monday and you have to have a negative test. If it came back negative, you have to know. This morning. And so on the car ride though, you know, like my natural impulse is to hate all medical procedures and far too many people saying how painful and difficult the COVID test was, how terrible it would be.
coach myself through that and say, you know what? If it's uncomfortable, I'll deal with it when I get with it. But even if it is, it'll only be for a moment. And learn to coach myself. And as it happened, yeah, it's a little bit uncomfortable. It's odd, more than anything else. And yeah, it stings a little bit like a pinch. But yeah, it wasn't so bad. I was so glad that I coached myself, because I, in the past, would have done all of the anxiety work before the event, all right? And then I would have believed the fact that it wasn't that painful was proof the anxiety had worked. Such as the broken logic of anxious people. I'll be happier if I can avoid life's difficulties, unpleasantness, or responsibility. We call this Peter Pan syndrome. That's part of this locus of control issue. I expect the big people to take care of things, not me. And therefore I don't want to be involved with life's difficulties. I want everything to be swimming, because again, remember, the child who is left alone does not believe, even as an adult, they can cope with stuff. You know, if you take nothing else out of today, take out that I'm a big person now and I can cope. And I cope all the time. And nothing I face has ever killed me yet. Right? Actually, you're coping way better than you think you are. The distress you are feeling is often the distress of the child. Remembering distress. You're not even experiencing distress anywhere near as much up here in adult life. You might just be recalling distress and recalling how terrible and lonely that feels to be. I'm weak and need to depend on those who are stronger than I am. You see this theme? Big theme, isn't there, about other people. See, this is the traumatized child is still waiting for a big person. No big person came. And Lydia, the answer is, you are the big person you've been waiting for. You are the big person you've been waiting for. That's the gift of adultness. I'm the big person. I'm the reliable big person I've been waiting for. Events in the past have strongly influenced me, and they must continue to do so. Oh, what freedom it is, friends, to realise that I no longer have to be the terrible son. It describes me, it doesn't define me, it tells me where I've been, but not who I am. I must be upset when others have problems. I must become sad when others are unhappy. We call that enmeshment. And that's often, again, one of the problems for traumatised people, is that they will join their feelings to the feelings of others and moderate and regulate themselves by trying to regulate the world. I don't know how to keep myself safe, but maybe if I can make you happy, that will in turn help me be safe. Right? It's kind of a broken little loop. Number 11, I should not have to feel discomfort or pain. I must avoid it at all costs. And number 12, one of my faves. Terrible idea that torments us, that there's only one right and perfect solution to any problem. So that, when I found the battery was empty, it was drained and the battery was gone, to realise, okay, yes, in my mind I had the idea we'd be leaving at a certain time, arriving at a certain time, but to realise that actually it's okay to leave later, it's okay to arrive later. There are many plans that can work today, not just the first one. And again, it's a shortcut of the brain to favour the first plan it thought of. But the healthy brain says, that's okay. Plan B exists because plan A doesn't always work out. So what will you take out of those? What are you thinking about? There's a lot of content. I'm going to stop around the break shortly. Silence as you comment.
Actually, that lot, but from what you said, I like, we are the big person we have been waiting for.
Yeah.
That's really
Yeah.
See, the problem with all of this, we don't deal with the trigger feelings and the lies behind it. We keep living in this sympathetic state. The fight, flight, freeze body switches on. That fear response from the video stays on. Because we are afraid a lot of the time. Because the lies have set us up to bump into the feelings we hate. Rather than learn to live with those feelings, to regulate ourselves. So we find ways to regulate them. So alcohol, we might say from the video, is just a way from getting from here to here.
I can regulate my body if I use a substance. For me, I probably found that I could regulate it through applause. I could just find a group of people to clap for me. My body would relax. I must be safe. I must be okay if I can hear applause. There was this time where I was the fill-in promo voice for TV3 while the regular guy was away on holiday. And that was awesome, because that was a time when the children and Debbie would all applaud every time my voice appeared on the television. The home was a happy place. It was a happy place. But of course, I can't have unfettered access to it. So instead, the risk is that I'll get caught in this addiction cycle. If I can't regulate in positive ways, if I don't deal with the trigger feelings and the trigger lies, then all I'm left is to feel pain. And so I feel the pain, and a lot of that pain is now about the beliefs, that I'm a terrible son. Ouch, that hurts. I should do something to make that pain go away. And then because the thing I do has, power all of its own, I get kind of addicted to that, and I start doing it more and more. And then I start feeling guilty and ashamed that I'm doing that thing. And then the guilt and the shame becomes a new source of pain that sends me back and seek a comfort all over again. That's the shame cycle. Right? So I feel bad about myself. I eat the pizza. I feel bad about myself for eating pizza because, keep getting fat. I feel bad about myself now because I'm fat. Until I go and eat some pizza. I feel better about feeling bad. This is the loop. So we want to cut the loop off as high up the chain as we can. If we could cut it off up here, if the inner pain that was driving this could be dealt with, that we can actually settle it, work out that I'm not a terrible son, that just describes me, doesn't define me. That pain belongs to Aaron the boy, not Aaron the man. That pain isn't actually here anymore. Nobody's actually calling me terrible today. Nobody actually has the right or power to make defining statements about me. The truth about me isn't even in the hands of other people. It's been settled. It's a done deal. My lovability and acceptability isn't something you get to decide. Sorry. So I have to learn to disconnect myself from your applause and remind myself it's not even in your hands, literally, in your hands. If I can cut off the inner pain at the start, I disrupt the loop and I give myself a chance to try something new, a chance to break free. If I don't do that, if I just try and change the action but never the engine room, I never actually address what sits behind, then that inner pain is going to come up, and what I see time and time again is people simply swapping out one form of false comfort for another. Oh sure, I don't eat anymore, I smoke cigarettes. That's no better. I don't smoke cigarettes anymore. I just work 80 hours a week. That's not actually any better. You're just swapping comfort for comfort for comfort. And we have to acknowledge that the problem with these sources of comfort is that they are false comfort. So as we finish this little section, let's name, why do we know they are false comfort? They're not genuine comfort. They don't actually change the original problem. Sure. What else?
They will give negative consequences.
Right, I'm going to get new problems as a result. So I haven't dealt with the first problem, but now I've got a new problem. Yeah, I have more problems than before. What else?
You just keep going back for more and more.
The effect doesn't last. I'll need another hit. And these are false comforts because they don't address the real problem. They give you new problems, and the fix is temporary. So I'm going to need another hit soon enough. Genuine comfort changes things, addresses the real issues, so that I don't have to keep coming back for another hit, because I'm actually working on stuff rather than avoiding stuff. But now with that, why we're afraid of pain. So, there's a slide that's not going to make the video. I might read that one too, just a reminder. Yeah, can we do the lights on just for a sec so I can see that one? Yeah, this is just a quick slide as we finish this section. Just talking about some of the different ways that we might in fact be covering over pain, avoiding pain, and things that become addictive. And some of them are obvious. We've talked about eating. It might be interesting though to think about some of these things like lying and worrying, and how it is that they keep us from pain, and that they become as addictive over time. They're all ways of trying to moderate the environment so that we can cope. But they're ineffective coping strategies. So there's all kinds of things. I just put up a wide list there, just so you can start to think, yeah, I might not be an alcoholic, but boy, I'm a recovering control freak. You know, if you're like me. Oh, I can read them out. Yep. So it says comfort eating, restrained eating, perfectionism, procrastination, criticism, drama, alcohol or drugs, workaholism, being driven, learned helplessness, escapism into TV, Facebook, etc., mind games, control freak, pleasing, achieving, controlling, lying, worrying, self-critical, over-intellectualizing, over-socializing, pornography, flirting, retail therapy. Might all be ways in which we use things to avoid the recognition.
What's wrong with retail therapy?
I believe someone's in pre-contemplation. Denial is not just a river. Alright, let's take another break, and let's try and be back at around 22, so it'll take about 15 minutes. We're talking about some answers, so let's start with the video.
Today we're going to talk about ATs, also known as automatic thoughts. They're those destructive and unreasonably negative thoughts that you have that make things go from bad to worse. Avoiding ATs feels as impossible as avoiding red lights when you're running late. You're gonna hit one or two, or every single light from your house to work on that morning that your report's due at 9 a.m.
So let's reflect again on the video. Some good stuff in that video, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's a shame they don't use what I use in counselling. I don't call them automatic thoughts, I call them automatic negative thoughts, because that's ACTS for short, and that way you get the truth coach, don't feed the ant. So that's how I try and remember them. The automatic negative thoughts, same kind of thing. Again, automated. They have a life of their own, they come from another place. The brain thinks itself. But what did you get from the video? You can watch it again another time for sure, yeah.
Is there not some space here to recognise the fact that the enemy is actually trying to feed us with rubbish?
Oh, well, the origin of the automatic thought might just be you, or it might be something more spiritual. We certainly factor that in, but given that we are playing in the lane of mental health rather than spiritual health,
right,
that's why we're focusing on the origin, because the other side of that is I often find myself thinking when a Christian client says, I think the enemy is attacking me, it's like, why would the enemy attack you when you do such a good job of attacking yourself? He has no business with you. Like, he'd have trouble doing better than you're doing to you. Right? So we want to make sure that actually we are not the source of that. But he might have sown the idea for sure, for those of us who hold that as a possibility, but it could have just been a childlike conclusion too. Just equally. Yeah, what else?
We can drag ourselves down very easily.
Yeah.
And mind right down. Yeah.
That's right. Or to put it the other way with the distress language, as soon as we allow the automatic negative thoughts to appear, the distress goes up. So we're already thinking, I'm not very good at tolerating distress, and rather than tolerating distress, I pump the distress up to unimaginable proportions. Or to put it this way, what was uncomfortable has now become unbearable. And our job is to do the reverse, to take what is unbearable and squish it back down to uncomfortable. You notice that we're not saying there is no pain. We have to deal with a level of uncomfortable. That's life. Life has uncomfortable bits. But I can cope with uncomfortable. Unbearable, now I can cope.
I like the practical tool on the 3 R's that you can, that's simple, you can remember it, it deals with it really effectively, and you're self-soothing yourself really quickly if you choose to use the tool.
That's right. And when you notice, and you give yourself permission to notice it's something my brain did. You know, that putting a bit of space between you and the thought, between you and the feeling, rather than owning it, rather than I am anxious or I am distressed, or I'm noticing anxious thoughts that with me today. I'm noticing some distressing feelings at present. I am noticing. I've just put a bit of space between me. The fact that I can observe them is really helpful. In fact, in counselling we call this the self as observer. And I want you to imagine yourself in this regard like a house. And the house is watching people come and go. Okay? Anxious thoughts are visiting the house. Oh, they're running around through the house today, but then they left. The house is observing the comings and goings. So self as observer is a very helpful step. So then I can say, okay, I'm noticing anxious thoughts. I wonder if my brain, not me, my brain is doing one of those shortcuts. Is it doing catastrophizing? Is it doing overgeneralizing? Is it doing mind reading? What's it doing right now? Oh, it did that shortcut. Oh, that's interesting. I'm watching now. And by giving myself some space, I'm giving myself some choice. Spaces and choice go together. Where there's no space, there's no choice. I just got to do what I got to do. If I am truly as distressed as I believe I am, I got to do what I got to do. But if I can put some space between me and the distress, now I've got some choices. Now what do I want to do? You hear what I'm saying? It's a really important, I know it sounds kind of very, huh?
Take charge.
Well, you can't take charge until there's some space, because if you are in it, if you are drowning,
Well, when you put that space between yourself and your brain and your brain consciousness, then that's what I mean.
that's right, then you can take charge.
And then you have possibly a choice.
Right, because without it, the distress is in charge. Because if I am the distress,
observing the distress, I'm in charge. The great distinction. So, I told you I'd talk about dieting just as a way of, it's kind of a less painful addiction to talk about. And I want to start with a really interesting quote from Kate Moss. That nothing tastes as good as Skinny feels. She's obviously never had my barbecue. What does she mean though? What does she mean? Nothing tastes as good as Skinny feels. What does it mean?
Is she saying that she's got a goal of how she sees herself and she wants to become that picture that she has in her head, and therefore nothing you can offer her is going to taste good enough to help her to veer from that path that she's chosen for herself?
Yeah, that's sure part of it. Yeah.
I think she's saying the pleasure of food is not as good and as long lasting as the pleasure of being skinny.
Right. Whether or not we like being skinny is not quite the point though, is it? I mean, it's what does skinny mean in this context?
Acceptable. Acceptable.
Okay, acceptable.
I think that she feels she looks good and other people, she's got admiration.
She could, but I want to suggest to you that it's not about being skinny, it's about what being skinny means. What does skinny indicate? We'll read the quote. What does skinny indicate?
It's about the feeling.
An eating disorder.
Well, for Kate Moss, it might have been an eating disorder.
It's the long-term thing, the feeling, the person you want to be is more important than the short-term little bit of, at this moment in time, it tastes differently.
Okay.
It feels good.
Well, to put it this way, nothing tastes as good as being in charge of my appetite. That being skinny means I decide, it doesn't decide. The appetite is not in charge. I'm in charge. Nothing tastes as good as knowing I'm in charge. That the appetite yields to me. And we can use appetites in a very wide range, can't we? We all have different types of appetites. Things that we like to pleasure ourselves or medicate ourselves with. There's nothing that feels as good as knowing that I'm in charge of it. It's not in charge of me. That's what Kate Moss is really driving at. Some of those other things may well be there, both the good and the bad things we've mentioned, but I think ultimately that's what the quote is driving at. Who's really in charge here? And that's the pathway, that's the goal out of addiction, isn't it? Is to say that addiction's not in charge anymore. Now, we've talked about the chocolate study. That reminded you, many of people, of the marshmallow study. And the marshmallow study comes from Harvard. And Harvard said if they only got to spend a few moments with you as a child to predict your adult success, they would simply do the marshmallow study. Are you familiar with the study?
Yeah.
Some are, some aren't. So just quickly, it's a pretty simple idea. This is a child study. The chocolate one I mentioned is an adult one. Child's presented with some marshmallows on a plate and told you're allowed to eat the marshmallow. But if you don't eat the marshmallow by the time I return, I'll give you more marshmallows. So we're testing the ability to delay gratification. We're testing impulse control. And where there is low distress tolerance, often what is also there right beside it is low impulse control. That when the impulse appears, all there is the desire to act. And some of us, thinking about the marshmallow, realise that we've eaten the marshmallow before we've even heard the instructions. just on the off chance that someone was going to take the marshmallow away. And indeed, actually, just as a little side note, this fear that someone would take the marshmallow away, that actually there probably aren't more marshmallows, is often part of the traumatized child's mindset, what we call a scarcity mindset. That what I have will be taken from me, so I need to have it. I can't actually rely on the world to be there for me, to have things for there to be more for me. It's a little side note. So delayed gratification becomes the skill. Remember how we talked about how we're not trying to become a better person, but a more skilled person. So we're trying to replace low impulse control with increased delayed gratification. So that I can move to short-term pain, impulse control, for long-term gain, delayed gratification. That the thing I want takes longer to get and appears later. It doesn't appear now. And they found that kids who displayed good impulse control, that were able to delay gratification, they could then predict were more likely to get higher education, to be elite athletes. You think about the people that we admire and hear the stories of the Olympic swimmer who's up at 5 a.m., swimming before work, and on a Friday night is saying no to pizza and beer with their friends. Why? Because they want the gratification of the Olympic medal at the end. And that's obvious when it's a big thing, but what about small things? And indeed, we want to think about the fact that without self-control, without that ability to actually master our appetites and our impulses, as the Bible says, we're like a city broken into a leaf without walls. That's a pretty rugged scene, isn't it? You're defenseless. That's the problem. You're defenseless. You cannot stop stuff going on because you're not in charge. So you are vulnerable now. Things will happen. People who move beyond their addictions are moving into a space where they develop the kind of the fortification that says, no, things don't happen to me, I happen to them. Right? Because I'm now back more in the driver's seat. Because when addiction's running the show, it's driving, not you. And that's why, again, for those of us who share a Christian worldview, the idea that something else might be our master seems so unappealing. Because we realise there's more to life than something else being in control. So one of the big things that we want to talk about today is to move from extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation as part of the pathway out. Extrinsic motivation, there's a time and a place for some extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic meaning there's some kind of reward outside of myself, or there's some kind of punishment I'm trying to avoid. There's a time and a place for it, but for the most part we would say that extrinsic motivators really belong mostly in childhood. If you think about why you brushed your teeth as a child, for most children it was because they were told to. They were being instructed to. They might have were trying to avoid the punishment of mum nagging or being annoyed or grumping at them, or the reward of a star on a star chart, so that ironically you can have an ice cream to celebrate your clean couple. And extrinsic motivators work really well for children, but not so well for adults. And we want to suggest that a healthier way of perceiving and thinking about life is that addiction is me still caught up in the extrinsic need for a reward, need for a good thing, need something outside of me to make me feel okay on the inside. I need something. But the problem is we don't have access to the good things all the time, and we certainly don't want to live a fear-based life where we're trying to avoid the bad thing all the time. So it really is a short-term thing, extrinsic motivation. But what about intrinsic motivation? How could we actually move that locus of control about where the power lives in my life and pull it back towards myself a bit more than we have at the moment, so that we can say, actually, I don't need rewards and punishment to be the driver. I can actually be motivated from within, not so dependent on externals. So, what does it look like? Alright, so these are the extrinsics, and we live in a world that still mostly uses extrinsics. We give people bonuses at work, we have celebration meals, we try and reward ourselves, and unfortunately we perpetuate a system that means without those things, if those things go away, we feel like we're missing something. And then, that's when we're likely to reward ourselves. In fact, I was very conscious yesterday that my impulse after the COVID test was extrinsic. The first thought afterwards was, I need to go and reward myself. And I caught myself, I heard the thought and went, no. The reward is that you did a great job of coaching yourself through that experience. You've already had your reward. That you did the right thing, that you did well, that you were the yourself you wanted to be. I don't need something else. How would eating something have made a difference in that moment? Why did I need something? But my brain habitually, of course, wants to keep looking for the reward. So, I thought I found another slide under that one. Try to swap that one out for one that had. I swapped it out because I found one that had, rather than connection, it had purpose. I enjoyed that. For those of us who are old, it reminded us of the insurance company, AMP. But anyway, we'll work through them. Intrinsic motivation. So here are the three elements of what it means to be motivated from within rather than from without. So autonomy is really key. Autonomy is this idea that I'm the one who's choosing, and that what I do because I want to. Nobody's making me. I'm kind of in the box seat. Right? Now, when we went to Sydney, my wife got lost one day, and she saw some lady walking out of the gym wearing a jacket that on the back said, "Weight loss coaching works, ask me how." So she did. And this lady said, "Oh, I've lost about 20 odd kilos, you should come and hear a presentation about it." Well, we went to a presentation. I was annoyed by the presentation. It went on too long. There was too many people. Yeah, you lost weight. Good for you. I didn't want anything to do with it. But of course, initially they hooked me in through something extrinsic. They said, well, if one of you joins up, the other person can join for $50. And they even dubbed most of the husbands in the room were $50 guys. That was the nickname for a $50 guy. And so my wife said, look, I would really like to have a go at this. I think this could work for us. Would you be willing to be the $50 guy? So of course, the financial reward of not paying full price appealed to my Scottish blood. And so I said, okay. We went along to the weigh-in night, and they asked a question. It's such a powerful question, and one I encourage you to ask people who are talking to about change with you. They said, out of 10, how committed are you to doing this program? I said, I think I'm at 8. They said, oh, that's good. If you were less than an 8, we wouldn't let you start. That's powerful. We wouldn't let you start. See, they knew that if you weren't an 8, you weren't going to do it. An 8 or higher. And that's a really great question, because in counselling, I use it all the time because it's a way of softening our goals. So, someone says, I'm going to go for a run every day this week. Well, out of 10, how likely you are to do that? Oh, that's probably maybe a 6. Like, oh, well, 6s probably don't happen. What would be an 8? Well, maybe I can go for a walk 3 times a week. Ah, okay, good. That would be an 8. Good, let's make that the goal. So it's about finding goals that are actually real. Well, anyway, I said it was an 8. At which point they had me pull on this machine during the weigh-in that told you how old your body was, not how old you are in your birth certificate. My birth certificate that day said I was 43. The machine said I was 80. At which point my 8 became very solid. I was very committed to change at that point. Very committed. And indeed, they used that future self stuff. Why do you want to do this? Well, because I want to live long enough to be with my grandchildren. I think that there's stuff I need to do in my life that I want to make sure I do, and I don't want to get kicked off the planet early, because I didn't ever get on top of this stuff. But my 8 was really strong at that point. So the presence of pain. See how pain's a good motivator? The pain of being dead early or sick early. So autonomy was really key. Nobody was making me do this. I had decided, and that's why, remember, I told you that the coaches kept reminding me about my commitments. Well, Aaron, you said you'd do it for 10 weeks. You said you'd do it. You chose. You said you'd do it. Yeah, I did. Okay, I choose. I choose to do it another day. I chuckled to myself because at the 10-week mark, I lost 12 kilos after initially not working at all, and then suddenly weight just sort of fell off me, and then they got me on the machine again, and this time it said I was 74, at which point later said the machine only goes up to 80. So who knows what I really was. And it was that experience though that led to the mastery thing. The mastery is about the fact that I can get better at something. That's a really important thing about mastery. I might not be very good at this diet at the beginning, but I can learn, I can practice. By the way, if you're wondering, the diet basically was a very low carb, sort of keto-based, protein-based diet. 10,000 steps a day, lots of water. The only money-making part of it was that they were selling Amway multivitamins as the kind of the money-making component. But they seemed very convinced that the multivitamins were key to it. I don't know if they were, but we did it because it's, and then this aspect of the coaching through the online thing, which I leant into big time to get the support that I needed to keep going. Anywho, mastery isn't just about me getting better at something, it's about this feeling, and again it's our Kate Moss quote, it's about the fact that my choices have consequences, that I'm in charge, my choices lead to consequences. So it was this feeling when I would stand on the scales in the morning and the number had fallen, and it was the first time, it happened quite sort of automatically. My brain said one morning when the number had fallen, you did that. That's right, I did that. I made choices that led to a consequence I like. I did that. Not an accident, it's not happenstance, it's not coincidence. Choice matters. And that helps remind me. Because it matters, I've just bolstered my sense. In other words, I don't need other people to do anything. This is the part that makes it intrinsic. I'm reminding myself and other people are counting on me to try and do this. That I won't be the only one who benefits. So it strengthens the sense of giving it to us. And the point is that I can keep that engine going every day. I'm not reliant on any other person to keep my motivation high now. I've got tools. I'm choosing this, my choices lead to consequences that I want, and other people are counting on me. Keep me going, keep me moving in lots of different ways. So thoughts about that? You were having a thoughtful look on your face before? Yeah.
That's just my normal day.
Just your thinking face? Just thinking it through? Just thinking it through?
I think the fact that other people are observing can be so very powerful. And for some people it can be more powerful than for other people. Because we want to please sometimes, but even that can be not such a bad thing. We just want to know that because they observe you, that's a purpose, I should say. That observation in the past might actually have been important.
It's not the observing I'm worried about, because observing could be lots of negative things. It's that it matters to them. It makes their life better too.
Yes.
That's the key. Not that they're watching, but that their life is enriched.
A positive thing in that sense.
That my alcoholism affects my spouse. It's making her life bad as well as mine, and therefore I'd like to be free of it. Not just for me, but for her also. Not so much the observing and the proving, because that, as you say, could easily be a slippery slope back to something valuable. But acknowledging, actually, I won't be the only one who's grateful I did this. That's more the point. Somebody else will be grateful too. Who is that person? Am I thinking of them when I reach for the drink? Anything else? Thinking it through?
I like the 8, and you said with the walking or something, the running every day a week, that the solution wasn't to give up on the whole thing, but to find something that you could do with the intensity of an 8.
That's right, yeah.
I've done that.
Yeah, we move away from the all or nothing. Well, I can't run 7 times a week, so sod it. What could you do that you could do with an 8 that would be sustainable for you, that had autonomy? Because if it wasn't that, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. See, that's the problem with extrinsic. It ends up being the wrong reason. The difference between my spouse is affected by my alcoholism versus she's angry with me for drinking. They're subtle, but they're importantly different. That she will benefit from me being sober is better than I don't like you being angry. I'm back in reward and punishment. We're trying to avoid. And ultimately, it's again me misquoting a Bible verse here, because the Bible verse is talking about the truth about Jesus, not just any old truth that'll set you free. But anyway, truth is truth, and truth is helpful. Because truth grounds us back in reality. Back in the reality of today. And And that is the challenge for those of us who let pain and trauma get the better of us, is that we are often caught in yesterday. We're not actually up here in today at all. We keep remembering another time when we didn't feel good, when we felt afraid. And it ultimately is truth, and that is the kind of the R's, right? That's what we want to replace this with, is comforting ourselves with the truth. Remember how we talked about how false comfort doesn't address the real issue? Well, comfort that's related to truth actually addresses the real issue. It allows me to comfort myself in authentic ways. And tomorrow I'm visiting Shore Community Church, and I'm going to share a story of being unemployed for a year and 150 job applications, and the pain of being overlooked that many times, and thankfully having just a little bit of skill that when my brain spat up the "nobody wants you, you're a loser, you'll never get a job," thank you thoughts, thank you brain, that was so helpful. I was able to correct and modify that by saying, no, we didn't learn that I was a loser, we just learned that I wasn't the best fit for that job. Somebody else was. Now, again, does it make it pain-free? No, it's still disappointing. But I've now robbed it of its meaning that was so distressing and so painful by using the truth. And then I'm able to live with it in a way that is productive and helpful. Whereas if I simply medicate, that painful feeling that I'm a loser is just sitting waiting to reappear. But if I actually replace it with something authentically true, and I want to keep focusing, true, not positive. True, not positive. I mean, some of the truths are positive, but some are not. I mean, you can give an example of a truth coach that I often give that nobody likes, that your future is full of wonderful and disappointing things. Wonderful and disappointing. That's the truth about your future. That's the truth about everybody's future. Full of wonderful and disappointing things. It's not particularly positive to say I'm an adult and I can cope even when it's painful. That's not really positive. It's truth though. Were you going to say something, Jo?
No.
Oh, you just saw the hand.
I scratched
Adjust.
your head.
You scratched your head.
With your freeness,
Yes.
you've got to be careful of what is free of.
Right.
Because there was a sign, I remember well, that said, "Arrayed marked frei," which translates German, translates to work makes free.
Right.
And that was on the wrought iron gates at the entrance to Auschwitz, where the trains came through.
Sure, free but not true. Work does not make free. So truth is the key point. Truth is we're looking for truth. And remember, your brain has a built-in BS detector. So it knows when you're fudging it. You'll never, ever, ever hear me in counselling say, everything will be okay. Bam! BS. How do you know that? You don't. Then don't say stuff you don't know. Say what is true that actually helps reorganize your brain away from the pain. But don't fudge it with empty positivity, because your brain knows that it isn't really true. Your brain has a good BS detector. So don't BS your brain. I think it was Lydia asked, so what do you do then if you don't have access to their view? It's a great question. I think about this. Here is the scene. Imagine, and many of us in this room have had children, so it won't be too hard to imagine. Imagine your child, age 6, bursts into your room at 11 o'clock at night, crying, inconsolable, shaking. And you say, honey, what's wrong? And they say, the boogeyman is under my bed, and I can't be in my bedroom because the boogeyman is under my bed and I can't stand it. What you do next is what you need. It'd be very, very bad parenting at that point to say something like, stop being silly, there's no boogeyman, what are you, some kind of fool? That wouldn't help. And yet, how often have you said something like that to yourself? You wouldn't even necessarily start, and it wouldn't be wise to start with, well, honey, let's think about that. I'm pretty sure the boogeyman is just something that we invented, and I don't think it's really real, and I think you'll find it. What would you do? You would comfort the child. Would you believe the story about the boogeyman? No. You know better. You know there's no boogeyman. But you don't mention that yet. You start with comfort. You start with consolation. You start with support. And then as the child calms down, everything is back to normal. Then you might say, okay, well, I'll come back to the bedroom and we'll look under the bed and I'll just check it, make sure absolutely that the boogeyman isn't there. And then we look and we say, good news, there's no boogeyman. We wouldn't stop and say, oh, and by the way, what are you, some kind of idiot for believing in the boogeyman? We would never speak to ourselves like this. We would never speak to a child like this, but why would we speak to ourselves like this? So we think of the frightened child. What does the frightened child hope will do? And you can hear in the way I've talked about it, that this, obviously, in a sense, it's very hard to hug yourself, although, interestingly, my wife started a practice the other day where a few months back, she said, sometimes when I feel anxious, I put my hand like this, and it actually makes a difference. My body can feel that I'm... It's interesting, for anxiety, people often use a thing called a weighted blanket, which is literally, as it sounds, a blanket with weights in it, which you use to kind of hug yourself and hold yourself, so maybe not entirely crazy. But it's much more about tone. How do you speak to yourself? What is the tone? Is it the tone of mum or dad, consoling and comforting? Oh, honey, come to dad. It's okay. Daddy's here. Isn't that one of the first things? Mummy's here. One of the first things we tell the child. What will we reassure them? You are not alone. Remember how we said the second trauma was feeling we were waiting for the big person to come? Now I'm the big person who comes. It's okay. I got this. I know you're feeling afraid. It's okay, I'm here. So we start by being the big person that we've been waiting for. By talking to ourselves the way we've been hoping to be talked to, maybe our whole life. And we remind ourselves that the opposite of addiction is connection. It turns out, actually, that the part of your brain that lights up when you form an addiction to something is the part of your brain that bonds. So we could say that addiction is bonding to a thing instead of bonding to a person. Addiction is bonding to a thing instead of bonding to a person. Which is why I'll often say, it's not so much that you need to give that thing up, you need to break up with it. Because you have a relationship with it. Because it might be the only consistent, reliable, available thing you ever found in your life. You don't need to stop eating, you need to break up with food. Because you've been using it like a primary caregiver. The only reliable, available thing that you ever found, mate, or whatever it is your thing is. You've been treating it like a primary caregiver. Mum and dad might have not been that reliable, but boy, alcohol is. Workaholism is. It's always there for me. We need to break up with it and find real connection in its place. Because alcohol can't love you. Pornography can't love you. Believe it or not, your workplace doesn't love you. When you go, they'll replace you. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing unusual is happening. We want to find real connection rather than the false connection that addiction wants. Okay? We're looking for real connection. And that's why we need others. So we are the big person we've been waiting for, and now we need to find some other big people who know how to give us the kind of love and support that we are looking for. All right, a couple of slides to go and then we're done. So just another way of thinking about the process in terms of what it takes to reprogram that limbic system so it stops being afraid so often. to recognise that, yes, I feel disoriented, it feels unfamiliar when I'm going without, when I'm doing something different. Nothing unusual is happening, but it's particularly this one that I want to focus on. That the feeling of discomfort when we give up our addiction is detox, but it feels like deprivation. Deprivation feels like I just need something. Detox is actually the feeling of addiction leaving my bloodstream. They feel the same. We have to know that this feeling, this uncomfortableness, is actually detox. If I ride this out, freedom is on the other side of it. That this isn't a deprivation. It's just that detox is happening. In other words, it's good news. It's actually exiting my bloodstream. Look how much I want it. Look how much I really hope for it. Oh, good. Detox is happening. I see it in a different way. We've talked about the progress pattern, the time between the episodes increasing, the time in them decreasing. And then finally, again, with our future self in mind, we want to invest this newfound time, newfound money in positive, life-giving ways. Now that I don't have to spend all of my time doing X, what would I like to do instead? And we should have that thought in our mind again. Not just what am I giving up, but what am I getting in its place? What do I really want? Okay, I'm going to finish. There we go. So just as we finish, a couple of people maybe, when you know what it is you lose. Leave it there on that lovely note, and Joe wants to do some feedback, and I appreciate your time this morning and your attentiveness and engagement as always. And there's a handout for those who would like a brief summary really of that CBT kind of approach to life and those lies that we need to do.
Thanks, Aaron. I feel like inviting everybody to give you an applause would be counterproductive.